We are living in a time of bad metaphors. Everything is fascism or socialism, Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union. Republicans especially want their followers to believe that America is on the verge of a dramatic time, a moment of great conflict such as 1968 or perhaps even worse, 1860. The drama is the point, of course, but no one ever says we're living through 1955. Ironically, the GOP is indeed replicating another political party in another time, but not as the heroes that they imagine themselves to be. The Republican Party has become inform if not in content, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union of the late 1970s. I can already hear the howls about invidious comparisons. I do not mean that modern American Republicans are communists, but rather I mean that the Republicans have entered their own kind of end stage Bolshevism. As members of a party that is now exhausted by its failures and cynical about its own ideology, and authoritarian by reflex, and controlled as a personality cult by a failing old man, and looking for new adventures to rejuvenate its fortunes. But no one thinks much about the Soviet Union in the late 1970s anyway, and no one really should. This was a time referred to by the last Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev as the Vremya Zastoya, the era of stagnation. But by that point, the Soviet Communist Party was a spent force and an ideological conviction, mostly for chumps and fanatics. A handful of party ideologues and the senior officers of the Soviet military might still have believed in Marxism, Leninism, and the melding of aspirational communism to a one-party dictatorship. But by and large, Soviet citizens knew that the party's formulations about the rights of all people were just window dressing for rule by a small circle of old men in the Kremlin. The party itself was not a party in any Western sense, but a vehicle for a cabal of elites with a cult of personality at its center. The Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, was an utterly mediocre man, but by the late 1970s he had cemented his grip on the Communist Party by elevating opportunists and cronies around him who insisted, publicly and privately, that Brezhnev was a heroic genius. The factories and streets and even a city were named for him, and he promoted himself to the top military rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union. He awarded himself so many honors and medals that, in the common Soviet joke of the time, a small earthquake in Moscow was said to have been caused by Brezhnev's metal festooned military overcoat falling off a tanker. Um, the elite leaders of this supposedly classless society were corrupt plutocrats, a mafia dressed in Marxism. The party was infested by careerists, and its grip on power was defended by propagandists who used rote phrases such as real socialism and Western imperialism so often that almost anyone could write an editorial and Pravda or Red Star merely by playing a kind of Soviet version of the Mad Lib. News was tightly controlled. Soviet radio, television, and newspaper figures had plowed down through stories that were utterly detached from reality, and regularly extolling the successes of Soviet agriculture, even as the country was forced to buy food from the capitalists, including the hated Americans. Members of the Communist Party who questioned anything or expressed any sign of unorthodoxy could be denounced by name or more likely simply fired. They would not be executed, but this was not Stalinism after all. But some were left to rot in obscurity, and some make work exile job, eventually retiring as a forgotten comrade pensioner. The deal was clear: pump the party's nonsense and enjoy the good life, or squawk and be sent to manage a library in Kazakhstan. And this should all sound fucking familiar. The Republican Party has for years ignored the ideals and principles it once espoused to the point where the 2020 GOP convention simply dispensed with the fiction of platform and instead declared the party to be whatever the fake squatter Donald Trump said it was. Like like Brezhnev, Trump has grown in status to become a heroic figure among his sycophants. If the Republicans could create the rank of Marshal of the American Republican Strike and medal for a hero of American culture, um, Trump would have them both by now. A GOP that once prided itself on its intellectual debates is now ruled by the turgid formulations of what the Soviets would have called their leading cadres, including ideological watchdogs such as Fucker Carlson and the dumbass Mark Levin. Like their Soviet predecessors, a host of dull and dogmatic cable outlets screechy radio talkers, and poorly written magazines crank out the same kind of what they call the fill in the blanks screeds to the full of delusional accusations, replacing NATO and revanchilism with Antifa and radicalism, falling in line. Just as in the old Communist Party is rewarded and independence is punished. The anger directed at Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger makes decided ideological criticism of the last century's Soviet propagandists seem almost genteel by comparison. At least Soviet families under Brezhnev didn't add the 3-page handwritten denouncements to the official party propagandists and reprimands, basically. This comparison is more than a metaphor; it is a warning. A dying party can still be a dangerous party. The communist leaders in those last years of political sclerosis, arrayed by a new generation of nuclear missiles against NATO and invaded Afghanistan, they tightened the screws on the Jews and other descendants, and lied about why they shot down a civilian 747 airliner. And near the end, they came close to starting World War III out of sheer paranoia. The Republican Party is, for now, more of a danger to the United States than to the whole world. But like the last Soviet era holdouts in the Kremlin, its cadres are growing more aggressive and paranoid, and they blame spies and provocators for the Capitol riot, and they are obsessed with last summer's protests. Indeed, they are fixated on all criminals and rioters other than their own, to a point that now echoes the old Soviet lingo about antisocial elements and hooligans. They blame their failures at the ballot box, but not on their own shortcomings, but on fraud and sabotage as justifications of a redoubled crackdown on democracy. Another lesson to learn from all this history is that the Republicans have no path to reform, but like their Soviet counterparts, the party is too far fucking gone. But Gorbachev had tried to reform the Soviet Communist Party, and he remains reviled among the Soviet faithful to this day. Similar efforts by the remaining handful of reasonable Republicans are unlikely to fare any better, and the Republican Party, to take a phrase from the early Soviet leader Leon Trotsky, should now be deposited where it belongs, in the dustbin of history.